More people joining my ranks. The legions grow. According to Pew Research, fully 1/4 of 40-year-old Americans have never been married. That's up.
It would help if I turned my mic on. I said, that's good to know you're not alone.
It's not alone. It's growing. It's up from 20%, 1 in 5 in 2010. Now it's 25%. Back in 1980, it was 6%. Wow. Gone from 6 to 25%, a quadrupling over the last 4 decades. As
Why is it that people don't want to get married?
I can only speak for myself on that.
Well, we want you to speak for yourself, Dan.
So
we want to know.
Mine is a very sort of narrow. I'm not making a general comment on the culture, just very narrow comment on some of the culture. Perhaps our next guest can help us. She has her finger on the pulse of things. Now her finger on the pulse of the suburbs. Bridget Phetasy is all grown up. She's a contributing editor for The Spectator and host of the weekly Dumpster Fire on YouTube. Bridget, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you think's going on there? We're now topping 1/4 of 40-year-olds who've never been married in this country.
Yeah, I just heard that listening to you. That's actually wild. It's not surprising, but I know a lot of 40-year-olds myself who aren't married. But I do know a lot of people who are kind of living and have children and aren't necessarily married. So does it take that into consideration, or are they just looking at marriage?
Yeah, probably. You're probably not a lot of emotional context to this data. Probably fairly straightforward, because then you'd also have to take into account sort of the happiness factor. How much happier are those in their 40s not married than those in their 40s who are, or 40 plus.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what that. I think there's just the dating is atrocious from what I've seen. I always joke that if I was a therapist, I would just sit down couples and show them the swiping apps. Say, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure?
That's true, because that wasn't around back in the day.
No. And it's funny watching people kind of stumble into that world if they got married before they're like little baby seals being released into shark-infested waters.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since you wrote recently about your migration to the suburbs, and now that you've got a child and a family, so I mean, how did it happen for you? A cotillion, or how'd you connect?
I mean, to be totally honest, we met in recovery. So we were both late bloomers in many senses of the word, addiction and alcoholism probably slowing us down. And we met in, 12-step programs, which is something I never thought would happen to me.
Perhaps they need one of those for dating, actually, a 12-step program.
I mean, I think
right.
doing something where you have common interests.
Yeah, sure. So you write at this piece I referenced. Had you told me when I quit drinking that a decade into sobriety I'd be a suburban Texas mom, I probably would have kept drinking. Well, it's too late for that. So tell us how suburban motherhood is going.
I love it. I was such a Gen X kid who spent so much of my life trying to, I feel like, be not normal, trying to be cool and grunge, and I feel like it's all just been this long path to becoming basic and loving it. I'm sure I'll have white pumpkins any minute now.
But why is moving to the suburbs a form of surrendering?
I think because city life is so much more grueling and, in my experience, expensive. But it does feel like the suburbs are made for families with kids. There's so much stuff to do out here for children, and I feel like they can just live lives much in the same way that I was able to ride my bike around until it was dark. I see kids doing that around here. My daughter isn't old enough to do that yet. but it does feel like there's a more family-oriented vibe,
but isn't
lack
that,
of a better word.
well, yeah, for sure. But isn't that sort of perverse? And isn't perhaps that's a comment on the general perversity of our major urban centers? And I lived in Chicago for 20 years in the city proper. But I mean, the
But you
idea
grew
that
up in the suburbs.
like what's grueling, so like maximum punishment at high prices, is what's attractive to the city.
I mean, I don't know that it was that way. When I moved to Los Angeles in my late 20s, it was still pretty affordable. I mean, I chose Los Angeles over New York because it was a place where I felt like I could still get more bang for my buck. And in the 14 or 17 years, I guess, since then, the prices have escalated. The state of the city has drastically deteriorated, and it's not affordable at all for anybody in the middle class.
Well, yeah, okay. So yeah, so the disintegration of the big cities that has been going on for the last 20 years and was expedited by the rioting and turning the city over to people who don't want to prosecute criminals and so forth. That's been the watershed development over the last couple of decades, in your view.
Yeah, I think that there's just a lot of things that have changed, and then the city seemed much more affected by COVID. They were a lot more locked up in certain states than they were in suburbs, where I feel like people led a somewhat more normal life, again, depending on what state you were in.
Right, and also too, I mean, I noticed the difference, being in Chicago versus say being in Southwest Florida, and the people around you.
Yeah.
So that's that. I think until you get some change of scenery and context, you don't appreciate how much the people around you impact your quality of life. Things being easy or everything being a hassle, people generally sharing sort of the same basic values or not, imposing their will or leaving you be. And I found that that's a real delta is the people around you, the milieu in which you live.
Yeah, and where I was living, it was very wealthy, and there was a lot of talk about diversity, but I'm not sure how much that actually played out in practice, and I didn't see it as much as I actually see it out here in the suburbs where I am now, and there isn't this constant, incessant, talk about diversity. It just is. It's just the way things are, which I think is actually quite refreshing.
Right. I love the fact you point to, like, when you talk about diversity and these, different restaurants and so forth. I love listening to like urban dilettantes talk about how they know this, this great little Ethiopian place. And that's all well and good. And I'm glad there's a great little Ethiopian place in some neighborhood that's near you or that you frequent. But how often do you go to that great little Ethiopian place? I mean, is that really material to your life? That's what you're hanging on to say the city's so vibrant and it's so dynamic because once or twice a year I go to an Ethiopian restaurant?
I'm not sure I feel like it's really just status. You have
Exactly.
to be very wealthy to live in a city and to protect yourself from a lot of the things that this happened during the pandemic, and it was outrageous to me how a lot of people who had backyards and devices for their kids and could afford tutors and nannies were expecting everybody to shut the schools down. And I'm like, who do you think this affects more? These kids shutting public playgrounds down, shutting public schools down. It was so maddening to me, that lack of awareness that this actually hurts the kids who live in apartments and they don't have Wi-Fi or devices like per kid, and their parents are still working. It's all just fake. It's like a fake reality that they live in.
Now, Bridget, can you ever see yourself moving back to the suburbs? Back into the city?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I've learned from life that I love cities for a lot of the culture that they offer, for being able to go to museums, that was what really I enjoyed about the city and took advantage of it. I loved going in LA to the Hollywood Bowl, and I want my daughter to have the experience of being able to see what cities are like. I'm not sure I'll ever be A, wealthy enough to live in a city, or B, I'm not sure I want to anymore, or at least for the foreseeable future while my daughter is growing up.
Yeah, and at least how they currently operate, it's not so attractive. Thus, the flight from the cities all over the country. She is Bridget Phetasy, contributing editor for The Spectator, host of the weekly Dumpster Fire on YouTube. Bridget, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
The word is out. People are abandoning their overpriced wireless carriers and flocking to Pure Talk for the same 5G coverage, but at a fraction of the price. In fact, the average family saves over $800 a year when switching from Verizon, AT&T, or T-Mobile. Get unlimited